Hi, I'm James Gardner, host of Your History, Your Story, a podcast for anyone who loves hearing fascinating tales about remarkable people, intriguing topics, and significant historical events. Our hope is to inspire you to uncover and share your history and your story. In this episode of Your History, Your Story, our guest is Dr. Todd Goldberg. Todd and I became friends back in junior high and high school, but after graduation, life took us in different directions, and unfortunately, we lost touch. In recent years, however, we reconnected through this podcast after he heard our episode on the Amazing Kreskin. I'm genuinely grateful for that reconnection and very pleased to be speaking with my friend today. Dr. Goldberg is a board-certified internal medicine and geriatric specialist, currently serving as an associate professor at Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia and chief of geriatric medicine at Jefferson Abington Hospital in Abington, Pennsylvania. He has been recognized for many years as a top doctor in geriatrics by Philadelphia Magazine, reflecting his deep experience caring for older adults and for families navigating complex medical challenges. One of the central topics of our conversation today is Alzheimer's disease, its history, the science behind it, and what it means for patients and families. This is a subject that is very close to home for me. My mother lived with Alzheimer's disease, and the impact on her and our entire family was profound. That experience has shaped my interest in understanding the disease more deeply. Dr. Goldberg brings both medical expertise and a compassionate, human perspective to this discussion, including insight into the very real challenges caregivers face and the importance of awareness around the support and resources available to them. In addition to his medical work, he is also an accomplished writer and dedicated history enthusiast, having contributed to numerous medical books and journals, as well as several works exploring the classic comic strip Prince Valiant and the Days of King Arthur, and other history-related comics. Today's conversation brings together medicine, history, and lived experience in a way that I believe is both important and deeply meaningful. I'd now like to welcome Dr. Todd Goldberg to our show. Welcome, Todd.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. I've always wanted to be on a podcast, and this is my first one.
Well, thank you. And it's a special occasion for two reasons. First of all, I'm very happy to be interviewing you, or speaking with you, I should say, about a topic that's very important to me and my family, and that is Alzheimer's. But also, we are friends. We have known each other, I think, for 55 years, Todd.
Probably. I don't think we weren't in the same elementary school, but we were definitely in junior high and high school. And since we were both in the G's, we always sat close to each other in homeroom. You were probably next to me. Yeah. So we were friends since the 1970s. Next year is our 50th high school reunion. It's a scary long time. So 1976 to 2026. I can't believe how the years have gone by. And now we're talking about geriatrics, and we're both geriatric.
That's true. Technically, what is geriatric? Technically,
well, that's a good question to start with. It's pretty arbitrary. People are living longer, but typically we call senior citizens people over 65 because that's sort of when you get Medicare and Social Security and people start to retire. But people are living longer and longer nowadays, so maybe that's too young to be considered a senior citizen, but that's still sort of the standard definition, and that's when you get your Medicare card, 65, and I got mine last year.
I think every time I hear people calling me sir who are in their 40s and 50s, I'm thinking that's maybe it, but let's go back to our friendship. So I'm going to tell our audience that you were on a basketball team back in high school.
Oh, no. Yeah, we weren't the most athletic kids, but we had fun. We tried. So what were we called again?
The Flames. I used to like ice hockey. A lot of our friends liked ice hockey, and the Atlanta Flames was an NHL team at the time. I liked the uniform.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, they were great uniforms, but we played and we had a lot of fun. You were also we used to sit together at lunchtime. I know in both, I think definitely in high school, because I would have the same thing every day for lunch, and it would be grilled cheese in those little foil packets
Okay.
that were heated by a sun lamp,
Mm.
French fries, and chocolate milk. And that was every day except Fridays when I would have clam chowder and pizza.
I don't remember what I ate for lunch in the high school cafeteria, but I guess it was good for you. You turned out well.
Well, thank you, but I think probably most people don't remember what they had in high school.
Yeah, if you can remember that, you have a pretty good memory, so you do not have Alzheimer's.
Thank you very much. The other thing is, so it's so enjoyable. I've a couple of friends, old friends of mine I've had on the show, and for a couple reasons. They've developed an expertise in an area, a deep heart for a topic, but it's also nice to be able to have conversations as friends.
Yeah.
We both remember each other when, and
Yeah,
it's
it's really
nice.
fun. It's really fun to catch up. And obviously, we've gone our separate ways and done different things. And I've learned a lot over the past 50 years.
Yes, yeah, I think we both have. I went into finance and accounting, and now I'm in history, and it's a good retirement doing this, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I went into a medical career, which we can talk about, but I was also always a history buff. So if we have time, we can get into that a little bit. And I'm particularly interested if we're going to talk about Alzheimer's, which is one of my areas of expertise, is the history of Alzheimer's is actually very interesting, how it was discovered and how it's conceived of nowadays as compared to years ago.
Definitely. We're going to talk about that. So, Todd, you are the associate professor at Jefferson Medical School in Philadelphia,
Mhm.
and you're also the chief of geriatric medicine at Jefferson Abington Hospital in Abington, PA. So, you specialize in geriatric medicine. Could you tell us what actually, I mean, I know it deals with the elderly, but what does it really encompass?
Okay, no, excellent question. And people always ask, what's the difference between what you do versus a GP? So geriatrics literally is the, care of the elderly patients, just like pediatrics is the care of children. And we are a subspecialty of internal medicine, sometimes family medicine. So people that do geriatrics go to medical school for 4 years and then do a residency in internal medicine or family medicine, which is usually for 3 years, and then do what's called a subspecialty fellowship in geriatric medicine or cardiology or whatever your subspecialty of interest turns out to be. So the whole medical training process is 4 years of med school plus 3 years of residency plus another year or two of fellowship. So it ends up being like 9 years from the time you graduate high school until you're an actual credentialed doctor. So in geriatrics, we're partly general internists and GPs for the elderly population, but we also have hopefully extra time and attention and skill to the kinds of problems that elderly people tend to get. So, whereas your general GP probably doesn't have much time to deal with Alzheimer's or dementia, that I focus on that, greatly all the time. And the other kinds of medical problems that are more predominant in the elderly, as you know, are arthritis, Parkinson's, different kinds of cancer, heart problems, lung problems, and older people have the same medical array of medical issues that younger and middle-aged people have too, diabetes and high blood pressure and stomach problems and stuff like that. We deal with a lot of prostate and urinary issues, fractures and osteoporosis, bed sores, and we also do a lot of our work in geriatrics in long-term care. So I spend a lot of my time in nursing homes and assisted living facilities and independent living facilities, as well as I have an office practice. I do consults in the hospital. We have a special program where we do evaluate people specifically for Alzheimer's, referred by their family or their other physicians. And a lot of geriatric patients are just have too much stuff going on or too complicated for the average GP to be able to have the time or motivation to take care of them. So I've had a few patients bequeathed to me over the years. Another quick summary of geriatrics is the American Geriatric Society and John A. Hartford Foundation and Institute for Healthcare Improvement recently came up with a paradigm for improving geriatric care based on what they call the 5 M's. So all of geriatrics sort of boils down to these five M's. Number one is your mind, dementia and stuff. Number two is medications and appropriate use of medications. Number three is mobility. And number four is what matters most, what we call goals of care, end of life types of decisions. And five is multi-complexity. We deal with people that have like a lot of different complicated things going on at the same time, and you have to tease out what's important, what's normal aging, what's a disease, what can you help, what can't you help. So it's interesting and often very complicated and challenging.
Yeah, I would think so. And of course, with the baby boomers well into the elderly category and a huge number of the population into that category, it's so good to have doctors with that specialty out there to be able to help and care for
Yeah.
these patients.
Yeah, and in addition to just their medical needs, a lot of people come to us for advice on like what kind of facility should they live in? Do they need help at home? Are they safe to drive? That's a common thorny issue. People don't like to be told that they're not safe to drive anymore. And they get mad when you have to tell them that, but you have to for their own safety and the public safety.
Oh, absolutely. Todd, why did you choose this particular field? Obviously, you had already gone to a lot of school before you had to choose a field. Why
But
that?
um, I sort of always knew I wanted to be a doctor growing up. I was probably, brainwashed by my mother, my son, the doctor from birth. Um, but I didn't really have a specific plan to go into geriatrics until I was in college. I was like a psychology major in college, and I was always interested in psych. Maybe I was going to be a psychiatrist, but I'm not really sure. But this is a crazy true story. I was in my sophomore or junior year of college at Penn, and I was applying to a special program they had at Penn called the University Scholars, where you could get early admission into med school and do research and maybe a combination MD, PhD or something. So I had to decide for the application for this program, like what I was interested in, and I had to come out with an idea for research. And something in the back of my mind, I don't know what, maybe I was just thinking about getting old or something. I literally suddenly had an inspiration out of nowhere. I'm going to do research on the aging process and discover a cure for old age before I get there,
Wow, what a goal.
which obviously has not happened and is not going to happen. Um, but that was literally the idea that I had, like a light bulb went off out of nowhere. And the next day I went to the library and I started doing when we went to libraries and looked up books, there was no internet. So I read up on aging and I learned that there was a new growing field of geriatrics that was literally just starting in America at that time. And I got in touch with one of the early people in that field at Penn, and I got interested in it. That's what I put on my application. I did not get accepted into the early admission to med school program at Penn. So after growing up in New Jersey and then coming to Philadelphia for college, I ended up getting into med school at NYU. So I came back to the New York area. And while I was in med school, I never wavered from my interest in geriatrics. I took electives, I did research, and then I applied for residencies where they had good geriatric programs. And it was funny when I was in college and I liked it in Philadelphia. I wanted to stay in Philadelphia for med school, like at Penn, but I didn't get in. Then when I was in New York at med school at NYU, I really liked it in New York. So I wanted to stay in New York, but I didn't get in to any of the residencies in New York. So I came back to Philadelphia to a hospital called Graduate Hospital, which is one of these hospitals that's been taken over and no longer exists in downtown Philadelphia. And while I was in my second year of residency, I did an elective in geriatrics at Penn. And the head of it, who turned out to be the same guy that I had contacted when I was in college, I remember this, but he didn't. He asked me to leave my medical residency early and start in geriatrics immediately because he really needed somebody. So I got special permission from the powers that be and medical certification to do that. So instead of doing 3 years of internal medicine, then 2 years of geriatrics, which is what normally is done, I ended up doing 2 years of internal medicine at graduate, and then 3 years of geriatric medicine and research at Penn. And then I finally finished, my training programs in like 1989. So I've been working in the Philadelphia area at a few different hospitals ever since then. I was never in my own practice. I always worked for medical schools and hospitals. And I've been in the Philadelphia area for the entire time, except from 2007 to 17. My wife and I actually moved to West Virginia for 10 years for an adventure, for a job to try to get a geriatrics program going there. And we really liked it. It was an interesting place. But we ended up coming back to the Northeast mainly because we were dealing with our aging parents, constantly coming back and forth, dealing with my father and my mother and then her parents, and it was too much stress. And my father was in Cranes Mill Nursing Home in West Caldwell. So we moved back up here in 2017. And I've been in my present position at Abington Hospital outside Philadelphia ever since. And in addition to just, being a doctor, I'm also a medical teacher, and I'm in charge of their geriatric fellowship program where we train young doctors to go into geriatric medicine,
Wow.
which unfortunately is not the most popular field because it's perceived as difficult and maybe not the most highest paying specialty, but it's very important with the baby boomers aging.
Oh, for sure, Todd. Well, my dad died many, many years ago, bladder cancer, but my mom had Alzheimer's. And I'd like to talk to you about that in a moment because it's
Sure.
really one of the big things I want to talk about. But also, I dealt with an elderly aunt who was very dear to us, and she didn't have children. So I was helping her with things, and she didn't have Alzheimer's, but there was a whole host of other of the things that you mentioned that were going on with her, including where does she go, where does she live when she can't take care of herself, and things like that. But
Right. So these needs are not just medical, they're also social and what's covered by insurance and Medicare, and we get into all these complexities.
oh, for sure. But I wanted to just touch base with something else. So you a lot of that school, that sounds like a lot of work. There's a lot going on. And you also, taking care of aging parents, and you've got your own family. And and yet somehow you find time to read about all sorts of different things, history, and I think even, music, the arts. You're
Yeah,
very
yeah,
curious.
I've always had a lot of hobbies, and I find some time, even for a few minutes in between the here and there, to read and go to movies and listen to music and write some stuff. As we've talked about, if you want to, we can get into that. I've written some, in addition to a number of medical journal and books related to geriatrics. I've also found the time, don't ask me how, to become one of the world's experts on Prince Valiant, the comic strip, which is history related because it's about the days of King Arthur and the Roman Empire, which I've always been interested in ancient history. And while I was in med school, I ended up compiling a book summarizing the adventures of Prince Valiant and figuring out exactly what year they took place in history based on mentions of the Roman Empire in the stories and who the emperor was.
That is so cool. And it got published.
Yes, so that little hobby turned into this book called The Prince Valiant Companion,
Oh
which
my
was
gosh.
published by one of my contacts in the comic book world, somebody I knew from New Jersey who published books related to comics. So I've actually contributed to or published 4 or 5 books related to Prince Valiant.
This is
I know,
crazy.
I know, just a crazy hobby in my spare time from medicine. So the Prince Valiant, just for fun. So the Prince Valiant Companion was reprinted in an updated edition. That was from the 1980s in the early 2000s, and updated by another Prince Valiant art historian named Brian Kane, with an introduction by Ray Bradbury, the science
Okay.
fiction author, and published by a comic book history publishing company called Fantagraphics. So Fantagraphics is also in the process of issuing reprints of all the Prince Valiant comics from the 1930s through the present in a series of hardcover volumes. And through my connection with Brian Kane, I ended up writing historical introductions to two of the volumes about the history of the days of Prince Valiant and King Arthur, and how much of that is really true history versus myth. So they published two of my articles called The Historicity of Prince Valiant.
I got to get my hands on some of this because you
Yeah,
got to send me a link. I'll put it in the on the show notes. This is
sure I will.
cool. And one of the things, Todd, that you and I spoke before, but a few years ago, we actually had the amazing Kreskin on our podcast. He has since passed away. What a nice man. He was one of our earliest interviews. He was delightful. But wasn't that something that he was interested in as well?
Yeah, so another crazy comic book related connection is that I met the Amazing Kreskin once, and I'll tell you how that developed through a mutual comic strip thing, which I'll explain. But as you remember, the Amazing Kreskin was from Caldwell, New Jersey, where he grew up, where we grew up, and he used to perform at our high school and stuff. And I loved him. I always thought he was totally amazing. I was a huge fan. So the other history related comic strip that I become an expert on and big fan of in my spare time is called The Phantom by an artist called Lee Falk. And the history connection of The Phantom is that, so unlike Prince Valiant, which takes place in the days of King Arthur and the Roman Empire, The Phantom is the first costume superhero, by the way, started in 1936, 2 years before Superman. And the story of the Phantom, very briefly, is that the Phantom is a descendant of a guy named Kit Walker who was killed by pirates in the 1500s. And his son discovered how his father was killed by pirates and swore an oath that myself and my sons to follow me will fight piracy and crime forever. And so as one Phantom grows up, the younger Phantom is trained and takes over his costume when he dies. So the character of the Phantom has been going on for 400 years and is felt by the natives of, Asia, actually, where it takes place, to be immortal because it always appears to be the same person. So this is another just comic strip with a history angle that I've been fascinated by. So I also compiled a history of all the Phantoms from the 1500s to the present day, and which is crazy. And it also got published by a fan magazine. So the publisher of this fan magazine, a guy named Ed Rhodes, had a little organization and published a newsletter called Friends of the Phantom. And every year, this group got together and had a lunch or dinner at Sardi's restaurant in New York. And one time in the 1990s, I was invited because of this connection. So it turns out the other guest at this luncheon was the Amazing Kreskin, because the connection is that he was also a big fan of Lee Falk, because Lee Falk's first comic strip, who was probably actually the first comic superhero, even before the Phantom, was Mandrake the Magician,
Mm-hmm.
which was published starting in 1934. And Kreskin was apparently inspired by Mandrake the Magician to enter his career in magic. So
Okay.
he was at this event, and I sat next to him and Lee Falk, and it was just amazing. And Lee Falk was very elderly at this time. He was in his 80s. So I said, I'm a geriatric doctor, and I'm very impressed that you're still so active and alert in your 80s. And I asked him a lot of questions about the history of the Phantom. But then I also, was talking to Kreskin, and I was just looking. So if you read the Wikipedia article on Kreskin, in the first paragraph, it says that he was inspired to become a mentalist by Lee Falk's comic strip, Mandrake the Magician,
Oh, that's it.
which features a crime-fighting stage magician in a top hat.
Of course.
Right. So that was my other odd comic book connection story where I met the Amazing Kreskin. And then when I heard him interviewed on your podcast, I loved it. And that's when I think I got back in touch with you
Yes.
after many years. And I said, "Oh, I just listened to your podcast with the Amazing Kreskin. I love him. I met him a couple of years ago." And here we are.
And here we are. And now that you mentioned it, it was Mandrake that you were also interested in, and that
Right.
was the thing that Kreskin talked about when he interviewed with me. And he was a really delightful man, and he had so many experiences. It was just so much fun. When somebody has, you think they have just a story. When you look at it, though, it really stretches out into a bigger story. Like I see the excitement in your eyes about talking about history through these even comics and characters, fictional
Mhm.
characters, and teaching history. I see the same excitement that you had when you were talking about your profession, your medical profession.
Yeah, and I always just loved reading about ancient history, the Roman Empire. When I was in Hebrew school back in West Caldwell, New Jersey, the teachers knew I liked biblical history. I'm not religious, but also when I was in med school, I read through the entire Bible, New and Old Testament, and figured out the timeline of all the kings of Israel and Judah. For some reason, I guess I'm sort of OCD. I love making lists and timelines and checklists and seeing, the order of things.
I love it. And I've told I think our listeners in the past is that I majored in history in undergraduate, and I love history. It's been my passion. And then I went and got my MBA in finance, and because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I ended up in finance for 40 years, and then I ended up with a master's in theology to throw on top of it. So I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but what I did know is that I have always loved history, and here I am doing this podcast in retirement. But even while I was working, like when you were going to school and working, you were still interested in, history and writing and all those things. So it's kind of cool. So we're including this in this interview because you're a person who, this is your story, this is your history. And when you have somebody who's a doctor and they're taking care of patients, that doesn't mean that that's all that person thinks about. There's so many different
Right.
parts to a person's life and their interests, but I think it enriches them to do great things in many ways. And I think that's Thomas Jefferson. You're another Thomas Jefferson.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a big fan of Thomas Jefferson. And yeah, I mean, I work hard and everybody works hard. And some people maybe are too single-minded, but it's like, they say all work and no play makes Johnny a dull boy. I do think you have to have some hobbies to balance out the
Sure.
hard work. And it's funny, the connection between my chosen medical specialty of geriatrics and all the other hobbies that I have is I like old stuff.
Hmm.
I like old people, old history, old artwork, old movies, old music. I'm also a big fan of my favorite. I'm also sort of an expert and super fan of the Beatles
Mhm, mhm.
and the Beach Boys and Beethoven. So all starting with B and all older stuff.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm so glad that you shared that with us because I think that's very important. And I would like to tell a little of my story to segue into a discussion about Alzheimer's
Sure.
disease. My mom, she didn't have a lot of education. She was pulled out of art school at age 16 when the Nazis started bombing London because my mother was born in London, and she was taken out of art school, temporarily sent out into the country with her mom, and then she ended up joining the Royal Air Force, ended up in London again, which is where the bombing continued, the V1, the V2 rockets. But she was a voracious reader, and she loved museums and everything
Me too.
history, everything history. Yes, the Victoria and Albert, all these things she would talk about. She was one of the most wonderful moms you can imagine. And she worked as a head receptionist at Nabisco Brands, and she knew everybody's names. She knew their extensions. She just had a marvelous memory. And
Nabisco, you said, where was that?
it was in East Hanover, the headquarters. And then I think they moved to Parsippany or local,
Right.
that
There
area
also used
there.
to be a big Nabisco factory in Philadelphia.
Ah, okay. She was the one that she knew everybody's name and everything like that. So my dad passed away first, and when my mom was about 65, and then probably when she hit about 70, we try to remember when she started losing her car keys. She'd say, you told me that already, and we hadn't. She'd repeat something a few times. She would sometimes pick up her granddaughters, my kids, and then the girls would say, "Grandma hit a curb today," and then we were trying to find out what's going on, and
I see
then
driving, big issue.
it was a big issue. She wasn't getting lost yet, but she was kind of getting a little confused or whatever. So we knew something was kind of going on. And then it started to progress, and we could tell it was getting worse, but she was more and more confused. And by the time she was about 75, it was much more profound. And yet she was socially very, very vibrant. She was smiling. She may not have remembered the person's name, but she knew their faces, and she'd go right into wonderful social mode. So she moved to a seniors facility in independent living. She had a bunch of neighbors and friends who we believe they loved her, so they were covering for her a little bit.
That happens in families sometimes. You don't realize sometimes how someone's functioning or not functioning until they're on their own, because often the spouse covers up for them or the family. But when they're widowed and they have to live alone, then it really comes out how they can't manage.
Yeah, and that's what happened was got more and more so, and we had to take her car away because she was also having eyesight problems. And you had mentioned it before, I think, is that it is a really traumatic thing to take a person's car away. It's their independence.
Their independence, they hate that. Almost every patient I've ever told they shouldn't drive anymore was not happy.
Mm.
May I refuse to believe it. I've never had a problem driving. Why are you punishing me, taking away my independence?
No, and it was
They hate that. And I always have to say, thank God nothing's happened so far, but you can wait till you get in an accident and hurt someone else as well as yourself. You don't want to have that on your conscience. It's not just you on the
no,
road.
that's absolutely right. So we had an obligation there, and then of course there was a doctor who was her at her facility who was, sort of, I think he knew some things were going on. And then we ended up taking her for an evaluation, and I forget where it was. I think we initially saw a neurologist and then a referral to this place to take a test. And anyway, a couple weeks later, or whenever it was, we got a report that they diagnosed her with Alzheimer's. And at this point, she was about 76 or 77, something like that. And I mean, at that point, we all knew it was well on her way. Anyway, it progressed. She ended up going into assisted living for like a day or two. It was a little late, and she went right into skilled nursing. She walked into a meeting of people and was looking for her father. We lived in town. We saw her all the time. We were managing her, sitting in on the monthly meetings and all that stuff. And then it was pretty, the progression. She eventually didn't know who we were, and it was very sad.
That's what happened. It's so sad.
Oh, didn't know who we were, but because she was so well read, there were certain aspects of her. I don't know, she could converse and she still knew a lot of stuff, but even that started to go. And then eventually she passed away at 83. But my girls and I, and Kelly always say, we lost her probably at least 7 years earlier.
That's what people say. It's like you sort of lose the person who they really were before their physical body actually passes away, which is so sad and so scary. And unfortunately, it's so common. It can happen to anybody as they get older. Um, I've seen statistics that maybe 10% of people over 65 have dementia, but that's 65. Over 75, it's like 20%. And over 85, it's like 30, 40, 50%. Some degree of memory impairment. Not everybody has Alzheimer's per se, and we can talk about what that actually means specifically.
Yes.
But memory problems are super common,
So
and there are some treatments now. Now, when your mother had it, it was a few years earlier. Did she ever take any medicine for dementia or Alzheimer's, like
yes,
Aricept or something?
she took Aricept, and I may be wrong, but from what I recall, they said that this could sort of slow it down for about a year or so. But then after that course was over, it wouldn't be like it held off. You didn't sort of gain that year. It sort of just went down from there as if she hadn't been taking it.
Yeah, that's what happens. And so when I first got interested in geriatrics in college, I actually did like a term paper in a bio class at Penn on like dementia because I used to hear the word like senile, and I was wondering like, what does that really mean? My mother's getting senile, my cat's senile, a friend told me. So what does that actually mean? So I sort of, again, went to the library and looked it up, and I learned that that's not really a meaningful scientific term. That's sort of a disparaging term for old people who are confused, messy. But what people mainly mean is they're forgetful. And this was in the 70s. It turns out that most people who were forgetful, it turns out they have Alzheimer's. It's not just old age. And that's when I started learning about it in the 70s. And at the time, there was no treatment whatsoever. Let me go through some history. I think the question is like, what is Alzheimer's exactly?
Well, that's my first question, really. What happens to the brain with Alzheimer's? And then what's the history of it as far as how did they discover that it was
Right.
its own entity?
So it's sort of related. And this is, also, so I'm interested in medical history and, it goes along with, my other interests. So this is what I learned, in college, and I've read, about it a lot since. And by the way, I just wanted to recommend, I just happened to find this Time magazine special on the science of Alzheimer's that just came out recently. And for you or any of your listeners, who are interested in this topic, I've been looking at it, it's really good. And there's a section on history of this. So Alzheimer's disease was sort of discovered in 1906 by Dr. Alzheimer. Now, obviously, people have been getting senile or forgetful or frail, for time immemorial, but it never really had a name. Okay, they just thought it was aging. I think this is very interesting history. So, in 1906, Dr. Alois Alzheimer's was a psychiatrist and neurologist in Germany, and a patient was admitted to his service at the mental hospital, and they've discovered her actual records and her name and her picture. Her name was Auguste Dieter, and she was a 45-year-old housewife who was acting totally bizarre. She was paranoid. She thought her husband was having an affair. She ran around throwing sheets all night. Very unusual for a 45-year-old woman. So she ended up dying in the mental hospital. She became bedridden and bed sores, much like our Alzheimer's patients today. But she was only like 51 when she died.
Wow.
So by the time that she died, Dr. Alzheimer had a research lab in Frankfurt, Germany, and somebody sent him her brain.
Nice gift.
Yeah. They said, remember that lady that you saw in the mental hospital, August Dieter? Well, she died, and he was studying brains. So he basically did an autopsy on her brain. And when he looked at her brain under a microscope, they didn't have photographs at the time, but he found these strange little plaques and tangles in her brain cells. And he said, I've discovered Alzheimer's disease. No, he said, isn't this interesting? This indicates to us that problems in the brain can influence behavior and cause mental illness. So maybe all mental illnesses are actually brain diseases. So he said, I think I've discovered something interesting. And he reported this to a meeting of German neurologists and psychiatrists in 1906 and published a little case report in 1907 in German, a one-page thing just describing what happened to her and drawing these little structures that he found in her brain cells. And that was it. And then for the next few years, he reported a few more cases that he found similar. And then in 1910 or 11 or so, a famous German psychiatrist named Kreplin wrote an early textbook of psychiatry, and he described these cases in one of his chapters on brain diseases, and he named it, I am now calling this condition Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, first time.
Yeah, so for the first time, right. So a year or two later, Alzheimer had another patient with similar changes, and I've read that by now this name was so established that he put on the death certificate that this patient died of Alzheimer's disease,
Okay.
which I think is really cool. And then he died in 1915, only in his 50s, of rheumatic heart disease, which was very common at the time. So from the 1915s to the 1960s or 70s, Alzheimer's was thought to be a rare form of pre-senile dementia in younger people. No one really knew that the old people that were senile really had the same thing until the 60s and 70s. Neuropathologists started studying the brains of older people that had senility or dementia. And lo and behold, they found that they had these same exact plaques and tangles in their brain that Alzheimer's had found in Auguste D in 1907. So only then did they start calling this disease of the elderly Alzheimer's disease. And they realized it was basically the same thing as had been reported in these younger cases years before. And then it was discovered that these plaques and tangles in the brains of Alzheimer's patients were made up of a protein called amyloid. Okay, so this is the new theory of Alzheimer's disease, is that it's not just old age and you're deteriorating, it's that something, nobody knows what, something causes your brain to accumulate these plaques of amyloid that destroy your brain cells. So that is true Alzheimer's disease. Now, not everybody with dementia or senility or forgetfulness has true Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is sort of an umbrella category, meaning your brain's not working, you're forgetful, you can't function. Most people with dementia, if they get a lot of testing, it is concluded either clinically or by biopsies or brain scans that they have Alzheimer's, but not necessarily. You can have similar symptoms from strokes, Parkinson's, Lewy body disease, a variety of other brain diseases. So dementia, people often ask this, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's? So dementia is a symptom that your brain's not working, you're forgetful, you're not able to function in life. Alzheimer's is a specific brain disease which tends to cause dementia, but there are other brain diseases that can cause dementia. And it's important for doctors to try to tease it out because depending on exactly what you have, it may or may not be treatable. So until the 1990s, there was no treatment whatsoever for any kind of dementia, including Alzheimer's. But in the 90s, they started to develop some pills that helped the memory and brain functioning a little bit because they also found that the brain cells that are related to memory seem to work on a neurotransmitter chemical called acetylcholine. So some of these medicines that have been developed like boost the acetylcholine in your brain, so it helps your brain function a little better for a while, but it doesn't literally stop the deterioration of your brain cells. So that's why it's slow. It might make you a little more alert or slows it down for a little while, but it ultimately doesn't change anything. So these pills, since the 1990s, donepezil, galantamine, rivastigmine, there are 3 similar pills that work on this acetylcholine pathway that boost your memory and slow the deterioration a little bit, but not that much. And then in 2003, and they've all been found effective in mild to moderate Alzheimer's, really not in any other form of dementia, but since you can't really be sure what form of dementia they have without, knowing they have those plaques and tangles, they pretty much give it to anybody who has any kind of dementia. And there's nothing else better anyway. In 2003, another medication came out for dementia called memantine or Namenda, which is indicated for more moderate to severe dementia, and it acts on a different chemical in the brain. And some people take both. So from 2003 to 2023, there was not a single new treatment for Alzheimer's that was developed, but they were learning about this amyloid theory. So for years, researchers have been trying to find a drug that actually affected the amyloid and prevent the buildup or eliminate the buildup in the brain. And only in the last 2 years have they finally come out with something that actually does that. So this is pretty cool. So it's like amazing science, actually.
Sure.
So there's 2 new medicines that are monoclonal antibodies against the amyloid protein that are given by IV infusions, and they sort of dissolve the amyloid in the brain, essentially. It's like miraculous. And they do brain scans and they can see that the amyloid isn't there anymore. So to have true Alzheimer's, you have to prove that they have this. The current theory is that to have true Alzheimer's, you have to prove that you actually have this amyloid. So how do you do that? And up until a few years ago, the only way you could do it was an autopsy on the brain, just like Alzheimer did. You can look at the brain cells under the microscope and see these plaques and tangles. And any living person, you would say they have symptoms of indicative of Alzheimer's or probably Alzheimer's, but you can't really prove it without like a biopsy or autopsy on the brain.
Right.
So a few years ago, they developed something called a PET scan, which is also used for cancer, that researchers in Pittsburgh discovered some kind of radio label that on a PET scan turns the amyloid a different color. You can literally see it on the PET scans. And in this Time magazine, they have a picture here of PET scans. And the patients with Alzheimer's, the amyloid, this compound turns it red. So you can literally see the amyloid plaques in the brain. And they've also developed now a blood test for amyloid and tau, and you can also get a spinal tap that shows the amyloid and tau in the fluid. So the current medical standard is that to truly have Alzheimer's, real, authentic plaques and tangles Alzheimer's, as discovered by Dr. Alzheimer, you have to validate that they have this amyloid with one of these tests. And if they do, then you can try one of these new anti-amyloid treatments. So this is like a new era in Alzheimer's treatment, but it's still not a cure. Many drugs have been found to reduce the amyloid plaques in the brain, but a lot of them have not been found to improve the memory. Because once your brain cells are damaged, it's probably too late. You might be able to prevent further damage, but you can't undo what damage has been done. So I'm not sure that it's even possible to really truly have a cure for Alzheimer's, because what would that mean? You're going to restore your brain to youth and remember everything that you knew when you were 21. Like, that's not possible. What memories do you want back? The good ones or the bad ones too?
That's a good
So, so you can probably, you might be able to find something that can reduce further brain damage, but once brain cells don't grow back once they're damaged. So the idea is that you want to try to catch people really, really early before they become seriously forgetful or unable to function and drive and stuff. So these latest treatments are only approved for very, very mild Alzheimer's disease. If you're far gone already, you're not a candidate for that. And because they're IV infusions, you have to go frequently for IV. It's like chemotherapy for cancer. You have to go to like an infusion center or a neurologist's office like every 2 weeks or a month for probably a couple of years. You have to commit to doing that. And 25% of the time, these treatments cause brain swelling because they're causing like an immune reaction in the brain. So you have to go for frequent MRIs. And until recently, they weren't approved by FDA and Medicare, but now they are. So it sounds good in theory, but in actuality, it's very challenging to actually do if you were a candidate for these treatments to really go through it. So it's not that widely used yet, but it's probably just the beginning of a new era. And the latest two drugs, lecanemab and donanemab, also known as Leqembi and Kisunla, they have been found to reduce cognitive deterioration over a couple of years by like 25 to 50%. Not 100%, but significantly better than like Aricept did. But it's still not a cure. But the idea is that if you can catch it early and sort of nip it in the bud and get rid of the amyloid and prevent further brain damage, maybe you won't get that much worse. And that would be amazing. But you have to catch people very, very early before they have a lot of brain damage. So I think someday they're going to do an amyloid blood test like they test your cholesterol now and see if you're prone to Alzheimer's, and you have to start taking something before it hits you. Because you don't want to wait and take the Lipitor after you've already had a heart attack. You want to take it to ward off the heart attack. So think of it similarly, like plaques in the heart cause heart attacks, plaques in the brain cause dementia. But if you wait until the plaques are advanced, like it's too late. So to the other interesting point now is that Alzheimer's used to be considered a type of dementia, but now, because of the new scientific definition of Alzheimer's as brain cells full of amyloid plaques, you can actually have Alzheimer's without having dementia because the plaques are building up, but you don't have dementia yet. Isn't that mind-blowing? Either of us could be sitting here, we don't know, having a few of those amyloid plaques in the brain, and we seem normal so far. But in a couple of years, we might develop dementia. And ideally, you would want some kind of test that can find that early before it harms you.
Yeah.
So there is a new blood test for amyloid, but it just came out and it's not recommended for asymptomatic healthy people. It's recommended for people with cognitive impairment and dementia to try to determine what kind of dementia they have, whether it's truly Alzheimer's, to see if they'd be a candidate for one of these new anti-amyloid treatments. But it's not yet being recommended for the general public to see if you're prone to Alzheimer's. They're not there yet.
I could see that.
Maybe someday.
Someday. Now I'm thinking, okay, my mom had Alzheimer's. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Her mother, she didn't decline at the rate my mother did. She was very forgetful, very sweet. My grandfather was alive and took care of her, but she did not have that dramatic step down like my mother did. And she had heart failure. So I don't think I'm showing any signs. I don't
So
know.
far, I don't see any evidence.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. But I think about this, if it was open to the general public, this test, and somebody who's like 28 years old, they take the test and it shows that they have these
Right. What would you
amyloid plaques.
do?
What do you do? What if you
Would
don't qualify for the medication?
right.
It could blow your life out of the water or
Exactly.
I don't know.
It's like I don't remember if I mentioned this to you before. There was a now Alzheimer's is not that clearly genetic. There are some genetic predispositions, but most cases seem random. So anybody can get it because your mother had it. Does that mean you could get it? Maybe. So could anybody. Maybe if it runs in your family, you're a little more likely than the average person, but you don't know what's going to happen. So anybody could get it, so everybody should worry about it, but you can't run around life worrying about everything all the time. You have to live. So let's say you could be diagnosed with that. You're probably, when you're 28, you're probably going to get this when you get old or when you're 55. That would ruin your life knowing that. You'd be scared, you'd be worried every time you forget your keys. You'd say, oh my God, it's starting. You might go for expensive treatments that'll make the drug companies a fortune, but is it really safe to give healthy young people like for years? I'm sure the drug companies would love it if everybody took an amyloid test and then went for treatment. They would make a billion.
Mhm.
But can the country afford it? Do we really want to go there? I don't know. If there was something easy to take like Lipitor, then sure. But if you have to go for IVs every 2 weeks and MRIs every 2 months for the rest of your life, like everybody can't do that.
Yeah, and you've also got this situation where you can have early onset, and that's terrifying when you see people in their 40s and 50s who've really it comes on fast and they decline quickly. Is there more of a genetic component to the early onset than the regular Alzheimer's?
Probably yes.
Mhm.
So remember Auguste D, that first patient of Dr. Alzheimer? She was like about 50 years old. They have found that there do seem to be some genetic cases that runs in families. And it seems to have something to do with the amyloid gene, that they overproduce the amyloid and it builds up in your brain. And one of these genes is called presenilin 1. Okay. So this is incredible. They went back and found Auguste D's brain slides in the basement of the hospital in Germany, and they tested them for her DNA, and she had the presenilin 1 mutation. And that's why she got early onset Alzheimer's. So apparently, if you have this, only like 1% or maybe 3% of people with Alzheimer's have this form, but it does seem to produce early onset Alzheimer's, probably because of an abnormal buildup of the amyloid. And if your parents had that, it might be one of these, I'm not sure exactly, but I think it might be one of these autosomal dominant genes that if your parents had it, there's a 50-50 chance you could get it.
Mhm.
So I might refer you to the popular movie, Still Alice. Okay, very popular movie about Alzheimer's, bestseller, made a wonderful movie with that red-haired actress whose name I'm forgetting. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Julianne Moore, was it?
It
The
might it
red
was a good movie. I just saw it about a year ago.
Yeah. So in that movie, They had a very good scientific consultant that helped them with the story. It's fiction, but in the movie, this is about a young college professor who starts losing it in classroom and getting lost on campus. And she's probably in her 50s and she's diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And in this movie and book, they do the presenilin 1 test on it and she has it positive. And then there's a whole scene with her family, like, do her kids want to be tested? It's really a tricky thing. There used to be a story about remember Arlo Guthrie, the folk singer?
Yes.
This is a comparable thing. Did I ever mention this to you before? So his father had Huntington's disease. Woody Guthrie, the famous folk singer, This Land Is Your Land. You saw him in the Bob Dylan movie,
Mhm.
and they showed him in a hospital. And apparently he had another brain disease called Huntington's disease, which is strongly genetic. And if your father has it, there's like a 50-50 chance you can get it. So the question was always, should Arlo Guthrie get himself tested for Huntington's disease when he was young? Do you want to know that you're going to have it? Or is it going to ruin your life knowing that because there's nothing you can do about it?
Right.
You would just be scared and worried and it would ruin the rest of your life. And I
Mhm.
think, it might be similar if you could be genetically tested for Alzheimer's when you're young and healthy for no reason until there's something you can do about it.
Agreed. Yeah.
Right.
This is such interesting stuff, Todd.
Yeah.
I really appreciate this. When we were going through this stuff
I
with
normally
mom,
charge people a lot for these kind of consultations.
hello, I'm losing a connection here.
Medicare might cover this visit.
Absolutely. So we didn't know what we were doing, but we learned by experiencing it. And even my mom's personality changed a little bit. She was always very sweet, but one time she cursed at me. My mother had never heard a bad word come out of her mouth, particularly not to one of her sons. It would never happen.
Right.
But
And
it,
this
I was like,
happens.
oh, and I was like, Mom, and Kelly, my wife, pokes me. She says, James, it's not your mom. It's not, it's not really her.
I
She would
know it's
never
like the
do that.
disease. I know it's like the disease talking. And
It was talking. And here's the other thing,
but this
Todd.
is common and horrible.
It is horrible, but here's the thing. Now, if we could just switch now to the caregivers, the families, the loved ones, and you work with them just as much, I'm sure, as you do the patients.
I do. And I've been one.
Yeah, tell us about your experience, if you wouldn't mind,
Well,
personally.
just very, very briefly.
Sure.
My parents did not have Alzheimer's, but they got old and sick, and that's why we moved back to, Pennsylvania from West Virginia to be near them. And very briefly, my father actually was in a car accident and broke his hip and had 2 surgeries and never really got out of bed after that. So he was in Cranes Mill for a while, and then he went home on 24-hour home care, and he was in his 80s, and he just sort of deteriorated and he had a history of mini strokes. So towards the end, he was a little confused and couldn't eat. So it was sort of similar, maybe, to Alzheimer's, but it was really more complicated than that. We thought he died from complications of hip fractures and surgeries, and he had prostate cancer, which he had very aggressive treatment for when he was too old. He probably shouldn't have had that, but that's a whole nother story. So he had a lot of things wrong with him. And as many people do, at the end, he was sort of out of it. And he died at home on hospice care. He always wanted to stay in his home in West Caldwell, New Jersey. And he told me years before, I'm going to stay in my house until they carry me out. And he did. So another thing that I've made a study of in geriatrics is proper filling out of death certificates, because sometimes it's complicated to figure out like what exactly someone dies from. So I was very nonplussed when I saw that his doctor wrote on his death certificate Alzheimer's disease
Hmm.
because he was never ever diagnosed with that. And he had a lot of other stuff wrong with him, cancer and fractures and strokes and pneumonia. And he was sort of out of it towards the end. So it was similar to the way that you die of Alzheimer's, but he never had it validated. And they called it that. I thought sort of inappropriately. So you have to be careful how you label things because these go into vital statistics. Alzheimer's is a common cause of death because people do end up bedridden, not eating, not walking, get pneumonia, and so forth. And it's legitimately recognized as the sixth leading cause of death in America. It's so common. But I didn't think that was true in his case. And this was also crazy. But after my father got home from Cranes Mill, my mother had been visiting him every day and was exhausted and couldn't breathe. And we thought she was just out of shape and getting old. But the day after he got home, she ended up in the hospital and had heart failure and cancer.
Oh no.
And she ended up dying on hospice care at home in West Caldwell about 6 months later. And towards the end, she was also sort of out of her head, delirious from chemo and cancer and lack of oxygen and stuff. So she was never labeled with Alzheimer's, but she was sort of mentally confused toward the end. So we were dealing with this, and it was very, very difficult as caregivers. And we were fortunate that we were able to get good 24-hour home care for them thanks to my father's financial foresight and having purchased private long-term care insurance, which I'm recommending to you and all your listeners. Not everybody has that or knows about it. Medicare and Medicaid do not pay for private home care or very limited, or assisted living or staying in a nursing home unless you run out of money and go on welfare Medicaid. So if you want home care or assisted living and you need it, there is insurance for that, but you have to buy it when you're young. Otherwise, it's prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
So based on that experience, my wife and I bought long-term care insurance for ourselves, and maybe it'll take some of the burden off our children, but you have to know about it and do it long in advance before you need it. And hopefully you'll never need it, but if you do, it paid for a lot of home care, which otherwise would have been very challenging to afford. And, most people that don't have a lot of means, if they don't have that, it's hard to afford enough home care and you have to do it yourself for free, the family, which
Exactly.
which is which is really, really, really hard and exhausting,
Yep. It's exhausting, even with my mom being, she was at a
physically and emotionally.
emotionally. My mother was at a place that went, she was able to, it was continued care. So she was able to go from independent to assisted briefly to skilled, but the cost did not go up prohibitively because
Good.
she bought in at a time. It was very wise, actually. But even without a huge financial responsibility for us, the care, the decisions, the meetings with the doctors and the physical therapists and the occupational therapists and all the people who are involved in all that stuff, it's exhausting. And when just seeing your loved ones decline is very difficult. But one of the things that was offered to us when we were going through this was a little support group
Yeah,
at the
very
thing.
important.
It was wonderful. It was really, really good. And people shared with us things. And then we brought a couple other people who were going through it in. And we didn't go for a long time, but it really helped us navigate that. And to this day, my mom's been gone almost 20 years now. To this day, there's people who I hear who are going through it, and we are able to at least share some of our experiences. And
Definitely. Like, there's support groups and websites and charities now for everything.
yeah,
But there's been for Alzheimer's for a long time. So the Alzheimer's Association was formed in, I don't know, 60s, 70s when it became well known. And it's a great cause. And I tell everybody who we diagnose with any kind of Alzheimer's or related dementia to hook up with the Alzheimer's Association for three reasons. One, now in the internet age, they have tons of information on their website. Number two is they have an 800 number you can call for advice 24 hours a day. Number three is they sponsor support groups. Now, because there may not be much medical treatment for the patient, but it's very stressful for the family. And if you're doing this all alone, you feel very isolated. Am I doing the right thing? Why me? And it really helps people to commiserate and share ideas and get suggestions from other people who have been dealing with this. So the Alzheimer's Association offers support groups that maybe some nursing homes do or other organizations. So yeah, if you can get just like AA for alcohol, or anything else, if you can get into a support group for families of Alzheimer patients, it's very, very beneficial because it's just so hard. We also recommend, there's a bunch of books about caregiving for Alzheimer's. There's a popular one that we recommend frequently called The 36-Hour Day, because it's like a 36-hour day job taking care of one of these people. And it gives also like a lot of information on what causes it, what to expect, how to deal with different things. So we want people to be educated about the condition, and then you have to learn to communicate, and take care of these difficult people who might resist care or say, like, there's nothing wrong with me, stop bothering me, which is a common symptom of Alzheimer's, by the way. They forget that they forget and they think nothing's wrong with them and they deny help.
They get mad at you sometimes,
Yeah, which
you
is
know.
very challenging. And also just, the Alzheimer's Association and similar things, just a good cause to get involved with. They have fundraisers, they have Alzheimer's walks, they sponsor research, they have newsletters. So it's just a great cause and organization to get involved with. I have no stake in them, but I think a lot of these conditions are as hard on the family, or maybe even harder than on the patient themselves, because they're often not aware of what's going on. So they're not the ones who are suffering. Everybody around them is suffering because they see their loved one deteriorating and not themselves anymore.
Yeah, I remember it always reminds me, my mom and my dad, but my mom, I remember teaching me to pray. And she would say, put your hands together like this. And I remember when my mom got moved into skilled nursing, her dinner tray came and I took the plastic Glad wrap off it and got it ready for her. And she said, James, can I pray now? And she went
Oh,
like that and it busted me up. I was doing what she did for me and it was just so sad. But I just think another thing is for the families to be comfortable with caring professionals like you who are scientifically knowledgeable, you're up on all the latest discoveries, but you're also used to dealing with families and seeing what they're going through and walking side by side with those people. So
yeah,
thank you for what you do, Todd. It's such a vital contribution to our
it is,
community.
and it's tough. And yeah, and sometimes I feel like we're treating and helping the family as much as the patient.
Yeah, yeah. Now I'm going to close on a really positive note, and this has been very informative
Yeah,
and
after that depressing material.
a little depressing, but we're going to do is put some of those links into our notes so that people can get help. But it sounds like there is some science that's starting to move in the right
Yeah,
direction.
so there's a little more hope for Alzheimer's and dementia than there used to be. So don't, be negative and fatalistic, get a correct diagnosis, try to get appropriate help. There's still no cure, but there is stuff you can do to help the patient and just help support them, in their declining days.
Absolutely. And thank you. But on a real positive note, you posted something recently, I think it was on Facebook, and I had read about it separately. There was a woman named Ethel Caterham,
Oh yeah,
116 years old in Great Britain. How do people live that
I
long? What
know.
happens, you know?
This is such a fun thing. Yeah. I give a lot of lectures in geriatrics and I talk about lifespan and stuff. And it's always fun to look up and show pictures of who's the world's oldest person.
I love that stuff.
So I know it's really fun. So that's also one of my hobbies is keeping up with who is the world's oldest person. And whenever they change, I post it on Facebook. So, obviously there's always got to be some world's oldest person. And you'll frequently read in the newspaper that the world's oldest person died, which is not too surprising because they're so old. And there's always a second runner-up waiting in the wings to take over the title. And why do these people live so long? Who knows? I mean, it's exceptional. There's only a few people on Earth who live to over 110, 12, 14, 16. They probably have good genes, maybe a good lifestyle, maybe just random luck, because, everything has an average, some extremes, and some people die younger and some people die older, and there's statistical extremes. So the interesting thing, though, is that usually these people are not American. They're usually Japanese or Brazilian or European. So it makes you wonder, is there something in their lifestyle that's better for longevity than in our lifestyle? And there probably is diet, environment, but it also might just be genetic. So anyway, so for years and years, the world's oldest person was a woman named Kane Tanaka, a Japanese woman. She was 116, then 117, and then she was like the Energizer Bunny. She just kept chugging along. She reached 118, then she reached 119, and then she finally died a couple of years ago at 119. So there have been a few other successors to her. But then last year, the world's oldest woman, and the world's oldest person is always a woman, by the way, because women live longer than men for whatever. Again, that's another interesting question. Why? So last year, the world's oldest woman was a 116-year-old Brazilian nun. So I read in the newspaper, a few months ago that this 116-year-old Brazilian nun died, and the new world's oldest person anointed by the Guinness Book of World Records was Ethel Caterham, a 115-year-old woman in England. So in preparation for this show, I just checked Google again a few days ago to see if there was anything new. And apparently Ethel Caterham, about 2 weeks ago, turned 116. And it was all over the news. So you wonder what her secret is, but nobody knows. The other interesting fun fact is that the world's oldest person ever, that's proven by like medical records and birth certificates and death certificates, was a French woman named Jeanne Calmette, who died in 1997 at the age of 122. Wow. She was born in 1875. Apparently, they think. It's been checked to make sure it was legit, and it seems to be legit. There was some question as to whether there was identity fraud by her daughter that might have, claimed her identity to get benefits or keep her rent-controlled apartment in Paris or something like that. But apparently it's true. So she is the Guinness Book of World Records as the oldest person ever proven. In modern times, that's the oldest. So that seems to be about the maximum human lifespan so far. And then the second oldest ever was Kane Tanaka, who lived to 119. Now, the world's oldest man is about 112. Even at those extreme ages, women live a few years longer than men. And again, why? Genetic, hormones, lifestyle, we don't know, but they do.
Well, I love stories like that. And we have actually interviewed, I believe it was two gentlemen who were over 100 years old we interviewed for our podcast.
You should interview Ethel Caterham.
Oh, I would love to. I don't know if she Zooms, but they have such stories to tell. And I know some of them may not be able to even really speak or hear or anything like that.
Are they in good health? Do they have a memory?
That's the thing. But can you imagine the stuff, first person accounts of things that happen in a whole different world from us, But anyway, these are fun things to learn about. Todd, I want to thank you again. This has been a lot of fun, and it's so good to be back in touch with you.
Yeah.
Please stay in touch, and I want to start looking at some of these books and articles that you wrote. So if you could send me some of those links or whatever,
sure.
I'd like to check them out.
Sure, be happy to. So yeah, stay in touch, and it's a lot of fun stuff.
Keep up the wonderful work you're doing, and I really appreciate it. And again, it's a lot of fun. And I'm sorry I mentioned about your brief basketball career. Okay.
Yeah, we never really got anywhere in sports, but it was fun. These days, I'm a tennis player.
Terrific. Todd, thank you again. I appreciate it. And say hello to your lovely wife for me.
Thank you. Likewise. All right. Good night.
Okay, Todd. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Your History, Your Story. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Facebook, X, and Instagram to stay connected. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have questions, comments, or a story to share. Until next time, be well and God bless.